All right, welcome everybody to today's Florida PBIS chat on expectations, rules, and routines for virtual teaching. Today's deeper dive module is going to take a closer look at how you can adapt your classroom PBIS system in the virtual world. My name is Rebecca Webster, and I'm going to be your host for today. So if you have any questions at any time, you can just put them in the chat box, and myself or another member of our team will get back to you in the chat pod or through the mic. So today we're going to have Dr. Lauren Ivanovich, Dr. Stephanie Martinez, and Mrs. Robin Vanover as your presenters for today. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to you guys.
Hello, everybody. This is Robin Vanover with the Florida PBIS Project. And today we have a presentation for you, Expectations, Rules, and Routines for Virtual Teaching. Our objectives are that you're going to learn the benefits of having expectation and rules, routines for distance or virtual learning. We've all been launched into this new environment, so we thought it might be helpful for teachers, educators, administrators to think about how do we take those current school-wide expectations, those classroom rules and routines, and convert them into something that's more useful today since everyone's teaching virtually. So think about just allowing some extra time to adapt to this new normal. We've all been placed in this situation kind of on a last minute notice. And so many of us have had to scramble to really adapt to our homes, to our offices. We've had to support our children with learning new platforms and applications. So I think it's important to take some time. So we're moving into, well, around week 3 now of this adaptation, and some of you might be adapting more so than others, and if you're not, that's okay, because we need to start small and work our way out. Some of the best things that we find when talking with some of our district coordinators or even with each other as colleagues is to reach out and communicate when you're having those struggles. It's important during these times to try to support each other as we all expand our knowledge and ultimately how we help our students learn in this new environment. Today's presentation is actually part of a series that we're producing, and if you'd like to learn more about that, you can look for the 5 essential components to PBIS, and we are breaking down each of these components and recording them for you and having online chats. So please check out YouTube and our flpbis.org website, which will have a closing slide in which you can jot down those websites. So think about those benefits for virtual expectations, rules, and routines. Pretty much the same as why we encourage you to have school-wide and classroom rules and expectations. We want to create a safe learning environment. Now, in these particular times, we have to be very much aware of unsafe internet locations and hackers. So you may want to be consulting during this time with your IT folks, your administrators, and kind of sharing some of those situations so that we can prevent any future disruptions. Class clowns can still be a class clown online. Some of my district coordinators have been sharing some of their stories of how kids are just somewhat enjoying this online time and having, you know, screens with their fellow students in front of them and waving and maybe wearing masks or hats or things like that. So take that all in stride. But by creating these expectations and rules, you can set those limits so that everyone is on the same page and you have a safe learning environment in which those students are engaged without distractions. For many of you, you already have school-wide expectations, so think about those 3 to 5 characteristics that have already been developed. And if you're a school that doesn't have expectations, you can still follow along in this presentation today and think about what you want your students to learn and get out of this distance learning. So expectations as a whole are broad and positive. They apply to everyone and in all settings. In this situation, though, we're talking about being online. We're talking about different applications and platforms. And ultimately, they do reflect your school's core values. These tips and recommendations come directly from our TA Center on PBIS, and the link is located below on this slide. If you click on that, it will take you to a brief that was created and launched very recently, at the end of March, I believe. So the recommendation from the center encourages you to keep those same school-wide expectations if you have those. Think about your online platform and applications as your setting. So instead of hallways, the cafeteria, the bus loop, we're talking about this online setting. Think about those possible activities that you're engaged in. Are you doing one-to-one instruction? Are you doing small group instruction? You may need to break down those expectations and rules to meet the level of instruction that you're currently engaged in. Sometimes there's special apps or platforms that require specific teaching and specific rules, specific skills. Make sure that you have a lesson that teaches those expectations, those rules, and how to navigate that application so that your students are well versed. Avoid just posting or sharing a matrix if you develop one as a result of this presentation. As our classroom rules and routines and school-wide expectations need to be explicitly taught, so will these expectations, rules, and routines. Be sure to correct those behaviors that you notice privately. Just like we would in a classroom, we always encourage teachers to address those behaviors with individual students in a private and respectful manner. And how will you be reinforcing those expectations and rules so your students learn those expectations are reinforced and they can continue to demonstrate those expectations and rules? So for more information, we really encourage you to check out that brief that's posted on pbis.org. And now I'm going to ask Stephanie to be a little bit more specific, and we're going to show you some elementary and secondary examples. So Stephanie?
Thank you, Robin. So here is a sample from an elementary school. This one is taken from the document that Robin was talking about. This school looked at what their school-wide expectations are. They didn't change just because we're virtual. They're safe, respectful, and responsible. Then they had to look at and see what are the type of settings that they're using virtually. So here's one about using that virtual online class and what does that look like when they enter it. How does that look different than when they're doing a whole group online instruction? So all the students are on together and they've really defined that. So if you look underneath that one of the examples I really like there under respectful is they want their video on at all times. Your specific school might say, we don't want video on at all times. They also have said that the audio will be off and let the students know that they need to put their answers in the chat box that they're using. So that's some very direct, specific instructions of what that would look like. Then they identified some of their other settings. So if it's a one-on-one, sometimes some of the teachers will have one-on-one sessions with the specific students, and that's what that is. And you can see it does look a little bit different because in this one, they're allowing the students to have their audio on all the time. And then small group activities. Some of these online platform features have the ability for the teacher to break students into small groups. So this is what it would look like. Think about if you're doing cooperative learning in the classroom, that's essentially what that is. So this elementary school first had to identify what type of settings their students would be in virtually and then defining it for them. So here's a different one. This one is a secondary example. Again, they used their school-wide expectations that they already had of preparation, respect, integrity, discipline, and effort. And then they defined theirs. They only have two big categories. One is distance learning, and then it tells what that looks like, and the other is technology. So they gave those information there too. Again, these come from the TA Center, so you can go back and look at those examples, and they do have some blank forms in there that you could use if you're going to develop your own matrix. Okay, so here's just a different example, so you can see here how this school has taken their school-wide expectations and adapted it. So just some different examples here to give you some ideas of what that would look like. This one is great because it not only defines what those expectations are for the students, but they've also defined what those expectations will look like for teachers. It's important for our students to know what those expectations are of us as educators, but they've also developed it for their parents as well, which is really important because as parents, we are now their teachers, and we need to know what is expected of us as we help our students with virtual learning. So here's some examples of how they've done that. Of course, our classroom rules are going to look a little bit different online than they will in the classroom. So here are some changes they did. So for example, under be respectful, before it was be in your seat when the bell rings. This one here is a little bit different. They have it mandated that all students are to log in for morning announcements and attendance at 8:30 a.m. So they're very specific about what that check-in time looks like for their specific school. So it just shows another way of adapting what you already have into now a virtual environment. So here's just some additional examples for you that you can use and to think about what that platform looks like. Not every school district is using the same things, so it's going to look a little bit different based on what your school district is doing as well. So for example, my son's school district, they're using Canvas and they are using Zoom. So within Canvas, they might have some different expectations and rules around submitting assignments on Canvas, but also using the discussion board and also using the help button is how we email the teachers. So you can break it down based on what the specific platforms look like for your school. So once we have identified what those expectations look like, the different formats that we're using, then we want to develop some rules. So a couple things to think about. Has your school as a school already developed those for your entire school? Or have they just identified it, the expectations, and are leaving it up to you as the teacher? If the school or district has provided those, look at what they are and think about teaching them. If they have not and they need to develop your own rules for those settings, think about what are the different formats that you're using. So for example, if you're using something like Zoom, what are those rules for Zoom usage? Again, things about muting and audio. Write those down, teach them to your students, and then bringing them up every time you have those sessions. Here are some additional things to consider as well when you're doing that. The big thing that I want to point out is we want to try to identify things that we want to prevent and have rules to address them. Keep in mind that we want them 3 to 5 positively stated and observable and measurable like we did when we were on our school campuses. Once they are developed, it's really important, as Robin said, to make sure that our students and families understand those rules and we're teaching it to them. Okay, and the last thing to think about, here's another way maybe to help you setting up some of those rules. When we do things like Zoom or Google or Teams meetings, there's lots of things that we need to do. We need to know the start time, we need to have the link to the room, we need to make sure our technology is working, we have a charged computer, all of those type things. So this is a checklist maybe to go through, and here's an example of Robin's daughter and the things that she came up when she developed those rules specific to her Zoom room. So those are the things that were helpful for her students to know up front, and she used it as a way to prevent some problem behaviors from happening when she was using Zoom.
All right, I'm going to take over from here. My name is Lauren. Again, in case we haven't gotten to meet yet, thanks for joining us. I'm going to continue to bring us out here through some considerations to use. So when you're thinking about, be it expectations, rules, or even procedures, we want to make sure that Overall, our expectations are aiming to continue to create and maintain a safe, structured, and consistent learning environment. You've done this likely already in your classroom and in your schools in the physical building. And how are we making this an extension to our new virtual learning? We want to make sure that our expectations benefit all students by teaching positive behaviors and building those life skills, even when there are disruptions to the routine. And this is quite the disruption to your normal routine. Regardless of what age you're teaching, as the examples that Stephanie gave, be it elementary, middle, or high, make sure that your expectations are fair and age appropriate. If you have school-wide expectations already, use those as you adapt them to your new virtual space. If you have been able to create your own rules for those expectations, you'll want to make sure that, as Stephanie highlighted, that they differ based on the platform you use. Some considerations would be to discuss those examples and provide those non-examples, just as when you do that in the classroom, when you're teaching the expected behaviors, the rules, and the procedures. You want to do the same thing when we do that online. And if you can, post them as a visual reminder for all. If you can't post them in your different online space, make sure that they are spoken about and you're reminded as well. So this is another example. This is an elementary school that has their distance learning expectations. And as we click through the next two, it will highlight for us the learning zone and use of technology. These are two that I want to highlight here for you to see how this school made the distance learning expectations their rules in the learning time. So that was any time that they are learning with their instructor, their teacher, or even doing learning in the home environment. And then also using technology. So how are you to use your technology, taking breaks, being safe online, having being patient, all those technology things can be really fun. And then also this piece here for supporting families. When you're thinking about developing those procedures, so you have your set expectations, you have your area and setting specific rules, and then how are those procedures happen? So when now we're learning online, how are we becoming digital citizens, for example? This comes from an elementary school where they are safe, responsible, and respectful online. They do so, and their procedures are they swim, they're safe, they work hard, they're improving and inspiring, making good choices. So those are their expectations, their rules, and the procedures for that are their online procedures, which is highlighted in there. You can download that from St. Johns County, which is a great example for us. So again, some suggestions for your using this in a virtual setting. Be consistent. Make sure that you can use these expectations, rules, and procedures as developed across any and all of your virtual platforms. If you're going to introduce a new virtual platform, make sure that you have also thought through how are you adapting those expectations and what rules need to be in place. What procedures do we need to teach our families, including not just our students, but their families who are supporting them, the procedure of how to get online, the procedure of how we log in, what needs to happen in the first 5 minutes. Those are things that we may take in advantage or for granted, and those are procedures of things that we might need to teach as well. We want to think about teaching the appropriate behaviors for virtual learning. Oh, can you go back? Sorry. Teaching those virtual learning, modeling them, having practices that you can provide. Start each session again with a review. And we want to make, as Stephanie talked about earlier, how are we identifying those online specific behaviors? We may need to think about what potentially could happen and try to backwards problem solve for those as well. And finally, we want to always make sure that we're using positive feedback, positively acknowledging our students just as we do in our classrooms at school should also happen when we are in the virtual learning space. It does not need to cost anything or involve tangible items. And there is another entire webinar as part of our series on acknowledging appropriate behavior, and more suggestions can be provided there, and we'll give you the link again at the end of this presentation. So as we close out, this was something that was shared with our staff and we thought might be good for you to just think about. We're often so overrun and trying to figure out how are we making everything we do in our classroom now on the virtual space. Are we doing everything in the best way possible? And we know that you are, and that you are doing your very best. So we want to just to remind you of some expectations for your own self-care. These are some really easy, nice reminders of 6 daily quarantine questions. What are you grateful for today? Who might you be checking in on or connecting with? What expectations of normal am I letting go of today? That's one I know that has been a good one for me. How am I getting outside if safe and able to today? How am I moving my body today? And what beauty am I creating, cultivating, or inviting in today? Those are some nice reflection questions that we hope would be helpful to you as well. And finally, this is our resource page. We are the Florida PBIS project. For the latest resources, our social media are great places to start. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and on that YouTube link, which Stephanie talked about earlier. Robin alluded to the floridapbis.org, and those are going to be great resources for you. All of the information we have and the other chats that are forthcoming can be found on those websites. We also have the Center on PBIS, that's pbis.org. They are on Facebook and Twitter as well. And the Association for Positive Behavior Supports, or APBS, is another great resource if you're looking for it. We hope that you are doing well, that you are staying safe, and we thank you for joining us today. Please reach out if we can be of any assistance. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you, Lauren, Stephanie, and Robin, for that wonderful information. We do have a couple of questions in the chat that I wanted to propose to you ladies. Christine has asked, how would you introduce expectations to students now that we have been in this virtual environment for a few weeks? And what wording do you recommend for the different grade levels? So I'm going to open that up to our presenters.
Thanks, Rebecca. This is Stephanie. I think one of the things to think about is now that you've been in your online learning platforms for a couple of weeks, think about things that maybe you've been having some concerns about. So for example, if you are doing something like Zoom and you're having issues with kids not muting their microphone, or you've got issues with them walking around the house wanting to show their dog while you're supposed to be teaching. So think about some of those things, and you can introduce it to your students as, I've noticed as a class we've been having some issues with our Zoom meetings and not having our microphones on mute. So we're going to introduce some rules today that go along with our school-wide expectations of be responsible, be prepared, and be engaged to address some of the things that I've noticed. And then you guys can come up with those, whether you're doing it together like you would as a classroom, or you could say, these are the ones that I've identified and we're going to go through them. And it's a great time to actually do some reflection of what's working and what's not working and trying to prevent some of those issues again. And as we said in the chat, I would look at all the different platforms that you're using. Maybe haven't even considered about communication. So emails or texts between the families and the teacher, the student and the teacher. That's just one idea.
And I would just add to that, this is Lauren. Thank you, Stephanie. That I know one of the follow-up questions to that was how to get an appropriate buy-in. And similar to how you might think about addressing or bringing in new needed probably rules and expectations at this time, is to ask your students, survey them just like you would in the classroom. Are you noticing issues? Are there things that you're wanting information on, or finding that something isn't working for you as a learner in the virtual space, asking families is a really nice way to support families virtually as well. And I know you're all probably being really inundated with support services, but would to ask families what's going well, what do you need additional support on, and that also can start to get not only buy-in, address some areas you might not be aware of also, and then get some of that family support that they may be needing as well is another.
Yeah, this is Robin. I think it's never too late. It may not have been one of the first things that schools and classroom teachers were thinking about. They were really busy with content and learning platforms themselves. So it's not a concern that maybe you didn't start off with those expectations and rules, but it's never too late to develop them, so to prevent any future problems.
Okay, thank you, ladies. Do we have any other questions?
Rebecca, I see there's a couple at the top that Therese had proposed, so maybe we can answer those. One of the ones that she put on there, I'm going to kind of go backwards, was using PBI strategies for students who are low functioning. And so I would think about if you have a student who maybe, let's say, has speech or OT, who has a communication device, making sure those expectations and rules that we've been talking about are being used with that speech language pathologist and that communication device. So working with the families to program that into that speech device if that's what they're doing. And then making sure the visuals that the teacher uses are the same visuals that are being used at home. So once they're programmed into the device at home, maybe those visuals can be shared with the teacher and the teacher can use that. Some other things to think about are visual schedules. So helping students with visuals that maybe are non-readers about what these expectations look like. And then another thing that's used a lot of time for students is social stories. So maybe having the family or working with a family to do some social stories about what it looks like to do online learning. And maybe one for each platform. Maybe they can get pictures of the students engaging in those activities. Any other ideas, Robin or Lauren?
No, those are all excellent.
I would just reiterate the consistency piece. I think regardless of functioning abilities of students or families or any of that, the consistency is, as you're talking about, Stephanie, is what really stood out to me as well, is that reminder of what we're doing in one space is really important to continue to make sure that that's communicated and used in a consistent manner to make sure that the transition both to virtual space and when we do come back, that's something we have to start thinking about too, and setting those routines up again in a new way. That consistency piece will be really important.
Okay, and the last couple of questions on there about buy-in from students and families and supporting families virtually, and I think Therese gave a great suggestion too. Just remember that asking the students, like I said, having them develop those expectations and rules with you. So asking them to identify what they've noticed, what they like or don't like about online learning, maybe what some issues they've had to help develop that. The other thing I will say maybe is from a parent perspective is that once those expectations and rules are identified, it's not just enough to provide them to the students, but figuring out different strategies to provide them to the families. And so I say different strategies because it's not going to work the same for every family. Some families have their students or their child log into the system and they never actually look at the system themselves. So yes, having it on that platform, maybe doing newsletters home, emails, those robocalls, doing little videos. A lot of families look at their school's Facebook page, so maybe you could do some examples there. One page pictures for families. So just a variety of ways, because I don't think one way is going to help everybody. But I think going through, just like you would with the students of what the different platforms are, and what those expectations and rules look like for that platform so that the parents are on the same page with their child so they understand them as well.
One other thought that I had also is now is a good time to be really checking in with our students and our families and assessing the level of engagement. Our students and families have been in this process now for a few weeks, and what's working and what's not working. There's a variety of expectations across the state that I'm hearing about in terms of the length of time that students are required to log on and to spend online. So it's a good opportunity to assess, is this working? Are the expectations that we set forward in the beginning still applicable now? Or are we, losing our students and our families? Are they burning out because the expectation maybe might have been a little bit too much for them? So whatever way that you have of surveying or assessing the level of engagement, I think is real important right now, moving into the last few weeks of school.
And just to piggyback on to what Robin just said, is making sure that families understand what the different platforms are and actually how to use them. Sometimes our kids are a little bit more savvy than the adults are. So, setting those structures in place too. What are the different platforms, what they're used for, and how to use them? And also thinking about with doing that instruction, some of our older students may be helping younger siblings. So having it in a way that if there's older siblings helping their younger siblings, that they even know what those expectations and rules are and what the different platforms are to assist them when they help their siblings.
And Stephanie, one final thought to that, and then I know we're almost out of time, is making sure that all of those expectations and ways to get support are really clearly defined for our families as well. That's a really nice way to start thinking about, as a teacher and educator, I might know who my tech person is if I'm having issues, but who can our families and our students contact? It might not be you, I'm not the best with technology to problem solve, but who can be available, and how is that communicated out to your families and to your students as well, so that they can help to problem solve and know the schedules of when you're available as well. So I think we might have answered the majority of the questions, and it looks like we're going to have a couple of polls left for you here. So Rebecca or Therese, do you want to introduce some of those for us?
Yes, so you guys should see the polls now. The first one we're going to ask you is, do you think a PBIS school-based leadership team webinar is needed? And would you be interested or able to attend at this time? The second question there is, what topics do you think the team members would be interested in? This is multiple choice, so feel free to check off as many topics as you would like. Okay, we'll just give that another minute and then we'll, actually I think that, no, we have one more, I believe one more poll after this one. And I believe, Therese, you have full control over that. All right, and there we go with our satisfaction poll. So how helpful do you think today's chat was? Was it very helpful, somewhat, neutral, or not at all? All right, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. If you have questions, again, go ahead and put them in the chat box, or you have our contact information. We look forward to seeing you at next week's TA Chats.